Hi, and welcome to Finding Your Way Through Therapy, a proud member of the Sightcraft Network. The goal of this podcast is to demystify therapy, what can happen in therapy, and the wide array of conversations you can have in and about therapy. Through personal experiences, guests will talk about therapy, their experiences with it, and how psychology and therapy are present in many places in their lives, with lots of authenticity and a touch of humor. Here is your host, Steve Bisson.
C'est toujours un plaisir. It's always a pleasure. And welcome to episode 141. If you haven't listened to episode 140, it's about my training that I'm going to be running soon. It's also going to be available for a fee, obviously, afterwards. So if you want to listen to that and get a preview of what we're going to talk about, that'd be great. But episode 141 is with Dr. Darley. Catherine came to me because I saw her online on Facebook, and she's a natural sleep medicine. And I know a lot of my clients have been struggling with sleep for a long time. So she's treated patients for over 20 years, and she teaches the sleep skills for people to thrive. And you can find her at different social medias. I think we're going to talk about it during the interview. So here is the interview after a brief word from getfree.ai with the code Steve50 that gives you $50 off. Go listen to it. It's a great commercial. Please go and listen. Hey there, everyone. You've known me to host this podcast for about 130 something episodes before I put actually any type of commercials on here. And I'm looking right now at my healthcare professionals looking to have a real impact with their clients. I really enjoyed this product, and I've actually used it personally. And that is why, which is very important for me to tell you, because that's why I want to share this. I want to introduce Freed, F-R-E-E-D, Freed, the app that listens, transcribes, writes your medical documentations for you. With Freed, you can pay attention to your clients, do things with your clients, and not be distracted by making sure you're writing notes. What also helps with this app is that the note is saved for about 10 days, and it does disappear. It no longer is there after a while. So writing down those notes is no longer your responsibility. The AI Freed will write the note for you and create a progress note for you. But it goes also beyond that. And what I really like about it is that it can help you set goals, and it even creates a letter. You can make any type of edit to it, and there's actually a button now for it to learn how you write your own notes. So maybe the first few days you set it up so that your Freed can recognize your note-taking process and how you want to create a progress note, either SOAP or what have you. And it really helps you with that. And the best part, it's very affordable. I really think that at $99 a month, you'll have access to what helps your practice. And I can tell you from personal experience, taking notes, writing down the goals, writing down any type of letter a client might need, that usually takes me, I don't know, it takes me a lot of time during a week. Maybe I used to do my notes on Sunday, and it used to take me about 3 hours. Now, I think that if it takes me an hour, that's surprising. And when you think about Freed.ai, it's very affordable. For just $99 a month, you can access everything that I just talked about. If you pay for the whole year, you actually save 10%, which is what I did, and I'm looking forward to continuing to use it. And because you hear this podcast, you're my friend, someone I know, I have a little treat for you. You can use the code STEVE50. Again, Steve, S-T-E-V-E 50. And you'll get $50 off your first month. That's right, more value for your money. I don't want you to miss out on how to get your practice going and give yourself a freedom to pay attention to what's important. Why we did this job is to pay attention to the client. So download Freed today. Don't forget to use my code STEVE50 for $50 off the first month. And let's make a difference in our clients' lives and make sure we can pay attention to them. Remember, with Freed, your clients always come first. Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 141. I'm very excited because, you know what, I'm someone who has two kids, two teenagers, I have a business. I work with first responders. I work with another business that I like to work with. I work with people in the armed forces, and sleep is not my friend. It hasn't been my friend, according to my mom, since I was born. And Catherine Darley, who is a natural sleep medicine, which sounded very interesting, saw her online. I'm like, I got to have her on, not forget about my audience, just for me. But Catherine, welcome to Finding Your Way Through Therapy.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. Everybody needs a good night's sleep, and that's my mission.
So, how many hours do you sleep at night, just by curiosity?
8 and a quarter, 8.5. Yeah.
Wow, I'm so jealous.
I
I
was thinking about it this morning. I often wake up with that old Kellogg's Frosted Flakes jingle. It's going to be a great day. The tiger. I mean, I'm dating myself. I think that was the 70s. But yeah, I often wake up feeling that way from having so much good sleep.
Don't worry. I was talking to someone this weekend, and I said the best part of waking up is Folgers in your cup, and they're like, "What?
Right.
Your Keurig going? Oh, your Keurig going? Yes, I know what that is. Okay." But all joking aside, I'm getting to know you too. So, but my audience would definitely want to know more about you. So, how about you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I got excited about sleep when I was in college and had the opportunity to do this super cool research experiment looking at the sleep of teenagers when they were on a regular 7:30 to 2:30 type of school schedule. And then in that same school district, they were remodeling one school, and so they didn't have enough physical space. So then they had same population go to school from 3 p.m. till 9, and I compared their sleep and their performance measures, and that's really got me hooked. So I worked in a sleep lab, worked in a overnight sleep clinic doing the obstructive sleep apnea studies, and then went to medical school, naturopathic medical school, with the idea that I'm going to found the field of naturopathic sleep medicine. And so I've done that now for 20 years, worked with people of all ages using behavioral medicine, lifestyle medicine, and naturopathic principles to treat sleep disorders and give people the sleep they need to thrive.
Just on that alone, I have questions. So, naturopathic medicine, for those of us who are not informed,
Sure.
I am actually fairly informed on that, but can you please explain it to the audience who might not know it?
Yeah, so naturopathic medicine is a type of medicine. You might be familiar with a couple other types. Chiropractic is a type of medicine, allopathic medicine, which is your medical doctors, osteopathic, several different types of physicians. And naturopathic medicine has what we call a therapeutic order, which we start at the least invasive therapies, easiest, least likely to have side effects, and work our way down. So, for instance, with insomnia, if we can use behavioral medicine, which is at that one of the first therapeutic order, we do that instead of pharmaceuticals. We try the interventions that are least likely to cause problems first, and that works well. And things like in naturopathic sleep medicine, we want to use light therapy and light exposure before we use pharmaceuticals.
No, and you're talking my language. I was actually talking to a client today and was telling me about, starting medicine for some of the treatment that he wanted. And I said, well, how about we give me time to give a little treatment before we start going into the pill section of the world? And I'm a big fan of. I'm okay with medicine. Don't get me wrong. We need them sometimes, and that's cool. But
For sure.
I like what you said, because I think that's, unless you haven't had the same experience, I think people turn to pills way quicker than they should sometimes.
Well, and I like to think about it in terms of teach a person to fish or give them a fish. That when you teach somebody how to care for themselves and strategies that support our natural physiology, that is empowering. Whereas when you have to go every month to the drugstore and take this substance and you feel like I have to take this if I want to get any sleep, that is disempowering. And I like people to feel like they have the knowledge and skills that they need to take care of themselves. And like you said, there is definitely a call for some of those interventions lower down on the therapeutic order, the pharmaceuticals, surgery, chemotherapy. We need all of those also as an option, but not the best place to start, in my view.
I agree wholeheartedly. And it's also realizing that you can start with something mild like melatonin before you hit yourself in the head with some sort of like benzodiazepine, like Ambien or something like that.
Yeah, totally. That's right. Yeah, I wish more people had that awareness, right? Because there are side effects of taking pharmaceuticals long term. For insomnia, for instance, they're only supposed to be taken for at most 10 days. And many people are taking them much longer.
Yeah, and if I hear more NyQuil or ZQuil as now they're trying to formulate it as, I'm like, okay, so how about you just get a fifth of vodka? You'd be doing the same thing to yourself anyway.
Right. Yeah,
Yes,
that's not recommended.
and the VIX people, yes, you heard me correctly what I just said. But one of the things that I talk about, you talk about a lot about like the least invasive to most invasive. And, part of me, obviously, as a therapist, I always go like therapy is a lot more effective than any pill sometimes. But I wonder, just as a standard question for all my guests, have you ever been in therapy yourself?
I have actually. I was married to a man who I really loved, and he was taking contracts for the army in Afghanistan and other war zones. And yeah, he came back a different person. So we did therapy then.
That's good. You did it as a couple or individual?
It was couple, and then when we got separated and we're going down the road of divorce, it was individual.
And did you enjoy therapy, or is it something that you're like, it's not for me?
I feel like it was extremely helpful in terms of helping me gain insights that helps me get through the situation. So, but I also felt that it was work, right? It took some thought, some willing to think about deeper causes and consequences and ripple effects and all of those things to kind of surface the truth.
I think that that's what therapy is, right? Or any type of treatment, right? Like even with, we're going to talk a lot about natural sleep medicine, but even for that, I think that it's not like it's going to be like, okay, tell me what to do and it's going to be fine. I mean, there's going to be work involved, and that's therapy for you, right?
Yeah, totally. And I think, I was having this conversation actually with someone yesterday about how sometimes it's easier to spend dollars than to spend your effort or your time learning a new skill or developing a new habit. And I think, the sleep skills that I focus on, I think that they're going to help and do 90% of the lift. And I might recommend a product, but it's only doing 10% of the lift. But somehow, and I'm sure that that I fall into this too sometimes, that it's just easier to spend the money on a new something rather than doing the work of fixing it. So, yeah.
I think I can change the oil on my car, but I'd rather pay someone to do it. So there's
Yeah.
times where it's okay to pay people for some
Oh,
stuff.
totally. Totally.
But learning how to do it for like sometimes doing it for yourself, especially for skills in regards to sleep, among other things, I think it's worth developing the time, you know and the skills, so to speak, to go forward. One of the things that the reason why I also was so intrigued by having you on is that, for me, mental health is essential. I think mental health, one day, my goal is, hopefully in my lifetime, that doctors will treat mental health just like they treat a physical. So once a year, you go see your mental health person. I'm good. I'm not good. Maybe you need some sessions. Maybe you're good for a year. Who knows? But I think that that's where I want it to be. But one of the most common themes of people who start with me in therapy, they complain about sleep. So how sensitive is our mental health to sleep loss in all reality? Because I think it's related.
Yes, it's highly related. The thing that people don't realize is just an hour or two of being sleep deprived can make a person more anxious, more liable to have panic attacks. And the reason that that is so important, Steve, is that about 36% of American adults don't get enough sleep on work nights. so they are chronically sleep deprived. And so when we think about this, kind of epidemic of anxiety, there's been a lot more talk about anxiety, and high numbers of people are reporting anxiety. It's kind of bi-directional. If you're sleep deprived, you're more likely to have anxiety. If you're anxious, you're more likely to have sleep problems like insomnia and uh, mostly insomnia.
And it's really like a wheel, right? Anxiety causes sleep issues causes anxiety.
Right. I think about it as like a negative feedback loop or a negative spiral. You're just, night after night, the anxiety during the day is making the sleep worse. The poor sleep is making the anxiety worse, and it just, yeah, feeds in on itself. And I think that it's really helpful for people if they're having mental health and sleep issues to do some treatments that are focused on the mental health issues and do some treatments that are focused on the sleep, to not assume, okay, well, once I get the anxiety handled, my sleep was automatically going to recover. That's not necessarily what we see. Or once I restore my sleep, the anxiety will recover. Really doing treatments that are focused on both ends of the equation makes all the difference.
I think you're making an excellent point that I tell people all the time is that it can't be just one solution to the problem. You know, one of the trinities, and no religious intent here, is I tell people about the mind body spirit connection. And even if you're spiritual, like you're doing well with your mental health and your body's okay, if you're not spiritually driven, there's going to be an issue with one or the other two eventually, because it just keeps on the feedback loop. Getting,
Yes.
I don't know what your thoughts on that, but
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, that's one of the other things that I really love about naturopathic medicine is that we think about whole person health. And, my treatments are focusing on diet, exercise, sleep, but then we also have kind of secondary factors, joy, community, relationships, right? Those are also part of a person's holistic health picture.
well, I think that you brought up something that I've, in the last few years, and I always knew it, but I kind of never put it into words. But reading a lot of research about community, I think that's key. But like I'm not going to get a sleep group going. So how does community help with sleep? I'm not going to be like, all right, let's have a sleep in 20 of us all together. I don't think that's going to work.
Yeah, so I'm glad you asked because I'm really passionate about this topic. When people feel socially connected and socially secure, they sleep better. In for sleep, we have to drop vigilance, right? And that's why there's this, part of the reason, at least, why there's this connection between being anxious and poor sleep is that when you're anxious, you're in a little bit of a hypervigilant state, and being hypervigilant does not help you sleep. So the thing about loneliness and sleep is that we know that when people are lonely, it impacts their sleep. And conversely, when people aren't sleeping well, interestingly, they're going to feel more lonely and tend to self-isolate. So I think, one of the conversations and awareness that's really come out of the pandemic, and I think has kind of stuck with us since that time, is recognition of how many people are feeling lonely who, one of the studies that I looked at that's relating sleep and loneliness asked, if there's an emergency, do you have someone to call? And the people who said, I don't have someone to call, their sleep was notably worse.
Hmm,
So yeah,
interesting.
really interesting, building community. And also one of the things I observed in my practice is, and I observed this probably in my early 40s or late 30s, that I had this group of people who would come in with sleep problems for the first time in their life about 2 or 3 years into retirement. And for me at that age, like, retirement was this golden place, years down the road. And I just thought, oh gosh, I hope that's not me. But when I dive down into their lifestyle and improving their sleep, what I really noticed is two things. One is that they didn't any longer have a routine, and also they didn't have their social life had really been tied to their workplace. And once they were not going to their workplace, they didn't have very many social connections left. And so I actually made it part of their sleep plan to find some activities, those hobbies that they just never had time enough for, or groups that they thought, oh, I'd like to do that, when I'm retired, to actually, commit, start building that lifestyle of connection with others. And I think it really helped.
I joke around with my retirees that have the exact same problem. I said, learn to yodel, learn to underwater basket weave. Who really cares? If you're doing it with a group, you're gonna feel better. And they always
Right.
laugh like you just did, but like eventually they go and join something a little less, Steve ideas. And they're like, hey, you're right. I feel connected. I feel more relaxed. And I'm like, yeah, that's so important to feel like connected to any human being.
Yes, absolutely.
I think about the stuff that even doing this podcast, I mean, I'm just privileged and blessed to be connected with someone on the other side of the country right now. But, I can now say that, what, I know Catherine, she's out on the West Coast, and even the connections that you make, even for an hour or two, I think are so important too. And I don't know what you think about that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm sure, there's so many things that you can measure after people have had positive conversations like we're having, where the blood pressure's lower, the heart rate's lower, the stress hormones are lower, right? And it's a pretty immediate effect. I'm sure you're familiar with some of the research where they, hook people up to sensors and then they're told to have a fight or have a nice chit chat, right? And immediately your physiology switches to reflect that.
And I think that the other thing that you mentioned, and I know, we did pre-interview, and I always kind of don't try to keep to the questions, but I want to throw a little bit of a question I didn't bring up in pre-interview, and if it's okay with you, obviously.
Sure.
But I push my clients to also have a bedtime routine, like a sleep routine within 30 minutes to an hour before bed. What are your thoughts on those things?
I think that is really essential. And I want to, Steve, I imagine that you have, and probably most of your listeners have heard about this idea of not having blue light or screens in the hour before bed.
Yes.
And so I'm a bit on a mission to bring that up, because although I think most people or many people at this point have heard this principle, I don't think people understand how very, very sensitive our system is to the blue light. Basically, if you hold your hand out at arm's distance and you can see your fingers wiggling, that is enough light to suppress your melatonin and impair your sleep.
Wow.
So that's not very much light, right? So the recommendation, so I have a little bit of a long answer. I hope you'll bear with me. So the recommendation is that a person get 10
Sorry, we're out of
lux.
time, people. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding, Catherine. Go ahead.
So the recommendation is that people get 10 lux of light for 3 hours before bed. And to give you perspective, 1 lux is equal to 1 candle flame. So 10 lux for 3 hours before bed is not
Three
very much
hours.
light. 3 hours. Yeah. So
Wow.
think about most of human history until we had a electric light switch. People would be in firelight, candlelight, or it would be dark. So a tip is, on your smartphone, you can download what's called a Lux Meter app, and there's free ones that are good enough. And basically, you hold the little camera lens at your eye level and measure how much light you're getting. I think and then you can check and see how much light you're getting. I think 3 hours before bed, most of us are still in a pretty active part of our day. We're getting tasks done, supervising kids, watching TV, doing computer stuff. So the other strategy, if you're not going to turn down your lights and turn off your devices, is to wear blue blocking glasses. There's many brands of blue blocking glasses. It makes everything like a pinkish red. The important part, if when you're shopping, and there's many price points, and I think that there's good ones at that $20 price point, you just want to make sure that they have these reddish lens. There's some that are marketed that have more of a clear clear colored lens. Don't get those ones. Get some that have like a really strong orangish red lens and
Yeah.
wear those instead.
Well, and I think that for those who are just listening, please go to YouTube and, Catherine gave a great example of how to use the Lux app to make sure that it picks up that light, and then she showed a little bit of the measure of the glasses because I've seen too many transparent glasses that are blue light sensitive or whatever, and I always found them to be not very effective. So.
Yes, the research, I mean, I'm making that recommendation based on research papers that it's really the reddish, strongly red lenses that are needed to have the best effect.
Well, I think that that's a good habit to have. I think that that's something that even like a couple of weeks ago, we had a snowstorm up here in the Northeast, and I had to be online for 9 hours. And my glasses were at my office, and it's about 40 minutes away from me. And I'm like, that's why my sleep was so bad that night, so shitty. Sorry, I do swear, and it's okay to swear on this podcast. I forgot to mention. But you talk about the stuff that's important to do. Obviously, I think those glasses on a daily basis is very important. But is there part of a daytime routine that you feel is promotes sleep at night so much more effectively? I mean, there's got to be some stuff, right?
Oh, totally, totally. So light and darkness are really important. And this is something that we've known in medicine and science for the longest time, for decades, honestly, but it hasn't really been adopted by the people on the street yet. I think mostly because we just haven't talked about it or given people clear recommendations. So during the day, within the first 2 hours of your day, you want to go outside for 20 or 30 minutes and get bright light. That signals to your body in many, many ways. It is daytime. It is time to be active. It's time to switch into active physiology. And our homes are just not bright enough, and our offices are just not bright enough. You can again use that lux meter on your phone and test the lighting. It's supposed to be at least 250 lux. Indoor lighting is usually 150, so indoor lighting isn't enough. Outdoors, at the same time, it'll be 10,000 lux of light. We're just getting like a 100th of the light indoors as we would get outdoors. And so that's 20 minutes of light in the first couple hours, and then every 2 hours go outside for 5 or 10 minutes and get a light burst. That will really help quite significantly, actually.
Well, that'll give me an excuse to every morning go for a walk, which is awesome.
Oh,
Um,
totally.
I had a friend of mine who she would literally sit at the window. She couldn't leave the house because she had COVID, so she'd sit at the window to get all the light that she possibly could from outside.
Yeah. The thing about windows is that they often have coatings, whether or not they look like they do,
Oh,
they often do. So we prefer people to go actually outdoors. I'm living in a new, smaller place and don't have a yard. And I've noticed I'm lucky enough to have a balcony, but it faces north. And so I don't really get as much light. But even if I just put on my coat and sit outside for half an hour with my computer, that gives me more of a burst of energy.
well, I think that that's all good advice, especially to get us going in the morning and then make us ready for sleep at night, I guess, right?
Right, because basically you want your melatonin, your natural melatonin, to start to rise at bedtime. And melatonin is suppressed by bright light. When we first wake up, we still have some melatonin on board, but when we go outside, it suppresses that melatonin. And it almost has a teeter-totter effect. If you strongly suppress your morning melatonin with bright light, your evening melatonin will be more and happen a little bit earlier, which will help you fall asleep.
And I know maybe it's a follow up question that's going to sound weird, but having friends up in Seattle, a little harder to get that sun sometimes. Is it so if it's cloud covered or anything like that, is that still sufficient? Does that help or do you need?
Totally. Yeah, it's even on an overcast day, it'll be at least 1,000 lux or more outside, which is, still 5 times brighter than indoors.
I just wanted to mention that because I know that some people will have that question. And, part of the fresh air, so to speak, as I tell people, is that it's not the fresh air, it's actually the sun and what you're getting from it.
Totally, totally. And that, the opposite hormone in some ways from melatonin is cortisol. Cortisol, we may hear about as being abnormal in stress situations, but we naturally have some cortisol and want to have some cortisol. What happens is cortisol also has a 24-hour or circadian pattern where it should be low in the night, and then couple hours, 2 or 3 hours before we wake up, our cortisol starts to rise, which helps us wake up, be ready to get active and do our day. And so we need cortisol, and the sun actually impacts our cortisol too.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's good to know because cortisol gets a bad rap. We do need cortisol. Just like I tell people that, adrenaline is a friend of ours, especially if a saber-toothed tiger comes out of the woods. But at the end of the day, I think that knowing that about cortisol is something that people don't really understand. And for general information, cortisol is usually linked to stress, but cortisol is naturally occurring in your body. It's just like when you have an injury, people don't realize, but we have natural opioids that help you relax that pain. It's those extra opioids that we know that causes a lot of problems eventually for people.
Right. Yeah. So cortisol naturally rises, like I said, and so it peaks in the early afternoon and then it should decline. The way that it is negative for our sleep is that when people are under stress, particularly chronic stress, it can make it so that their cortisol is still elevated at bedtime and interfere with sleep. We do want it to be lower in the afternoon or in the evening than it is in the morning.
So why do I go pick up my kids in the afternoon? Anyway, just kidding, just kidding, just kidding. Love you, girls. They're both teenagers, so maybe that's just what I'm talking about.
Teenagers have really unique sleep circadian rhythms.
You're telling me. I mean, I'm like, she's like, oh, I got up at 3 a.m. today. Like, why? And so it just is a weird pattern.
Yep. Yep.
You get used to it, I guess. But one of the things my teenager does at 3 a.m. is also because she gets to start thinking. She races. I have this, I have that. We're going on a trip soon, so she's thinking about, what do I have to bring? If I forget, what's going to happen? How are we going to fill this suitcase? Because she's again a teenager, so the suitcase the size of this room is probably not big enough. But all joking aside, part of it is to how do we calm these thoughts in the middle of the night? I mean, I talk about my teenager, but believe me, that's in mental health, I'd say it's a 70 to 80% issue for most of my clients.
Oh, totally. So I think calming your racing mind is a strategy. Well, it takes a couple steps. The first step, which I think sometimes people don't mention or name, is to be okay with not thinking in the middle of the night. I love how in the last couple years, there's been so much more talk about boundaries, about setting appropriate boundaries. And I think, an hour before bed, say, enough already to my to-do list. The to-do list will be there tomorrow, and I deserve to have a good night rest and take this time from, an hour before bed, 2 hours before bed until I wake up to be mentally off duty. And, for people who have mental health issues or other stressors going on in their life, it can feel sometimes hard to rest when you're problem solving or your mind, you just don't have a solution yet. But sometimes when we set a problem aside and we come back to it fresh the next day, we're able to make some progress, right? So I like to first set boundaries that sleep is just for sleep. It is not time to think about stuff. And so then you have to make time to think about stuff before bed. And I think this can be particularly tricky for people who are really busy or who are parents, but take 10 minutes to write down those thoughts that come up, and you could use any format. Could be a problem solution brainstorming chart, could be a to-do list, could be full sentence narrative like diary, like, that conversation that you wish had gone differently. And then in the night, once you're in bed, if your mind starts racing, have some kind of statement that you tell yourself that is true. I already thought about that because you did your journaling. Now is my time to sleep. I can think about it tomorrow. I don't, sometimes people get into self-blaming or shaming of why am I thinking about this, or it's stupid that I'm thinking about this. Don't do that, because I think if we're thinking about something, we're not done with it. We need to think about it, right? So, but it's just not the time, right? And anybody who's had kids or a coworker or a neighbor, sometimes people ask you for stuff and you say, yes, I will do that, but not right now. And
Right.
basically you're saying that to your thoughts. And, whatever statement you have that can kind of set your thoughts aside, um, will be effective. Sometimes people read mantras or suggest a mantra. I don't really personally go for just generalized mantras because I think it needs to hit your heart.
Right.
It needs to feel true to you. Like a mantra of, oh, everything's going to be okay. There is no oomph with that for your heart
Right.
for many people. Maybe I'm just saying for myself, but for me, like that kind of platitude just doesn't work. Like, but something like it's, so the phrase has to be true for you. And then you can do some kind of sleep promoting practice. Tell yourself a story, do progressive muscle relaxation, do a gratitude practice until you're asleep with the intention of, falling asleep to that practice.
And I agree with the mantra. It's got to be personally meaningful because everything's going to be all right. All I can think of is like, oh, Bob Marley. Oh, what else did he? Oh, I really like Bob Marley. Now suddenly I'm in the rabbit hole while you were talking. I'm like, oh, I got to get back to the interview. Thinking about Jamaica now. Um, so yeah, I definitely agree, and it's got to be something that's meaningful to you. And the other part too is I agree with you. Another point, which I tell my clients all the time, on my couch in my work there's a stuffed bluebird that I put in the back purposely. And when people are like, I just want to stop thinking about that, I say, okay, there's a bluebird behind you. Don't worry about it. There's a bluebird. It's stuff. It's not going to hurt you. It's a bluebird, but don't worry about it. And then I start talking. I said, what are you thinking about right now? And they go, all I can think of is there a bluebird behind me. I said, yes. So that's why that doesn't work, not to think about something.
Right, right. It doesn't work. And yeah, and so sometimes people say, oh, well, what I do is I have, my phone or a piece of paper and pencil, and I just capture my thoughts in the night. I think that is not a good idea either, because it trains you that bedtime is the time to think about stuff. And bedtime is not the time to think about stuff. Bedtime is the time to let your mind relax, your body relax. We need that restorative physiology of sleep.
Well, and you hit a big pet peeve of mine there. And the pet peeve of mine is the phone next to you while you're sleeping. That's a huge pet peeve of mine. I tell my clients, you got to move that away. Whether you believe
Totally.
in Wi-Fi signals or not, they do affect you. Whether you'll believe me or not, I really don't care. And the other thing too, it's too easy to reach to your phone. My phone has always been in. I've been, at one point I didn't have a phone because I'm old enough that we grew up with, with not having a phone next to you. But my phone is always on a different floor than where I sleep. Hotels excluded, but you get the
Right.
point.
I think that's an excellent idea, because the thing about the phone is that we are trained to be vigilant to it. And to have an object that you're trained to be vigilant and like hyper responsive to next to your head when you're trying to decrease vigilance is not a good idea. And there's actually been studies that even when a phone is on airplane mode and you're just using it like as an alarm, it disturbs your sleep. So it should be in another room. And the concern, real life concern that comes up when I say that to people is like, oh, I need to be reached. And I think that's true. There is a handful of people that we need to be reached by, so I set my phone up that my parents and my child can reach me. Their phone calls will come through during sleep hours, and my phone is programmed for those sleep hours. And otherwise, so I'm basically using it like as an emergency dial-up phone during sleep hours. And that is really great way to set boundaries. Like sometimes people, they're responding to notifications, texts, emails. You don't need to do that. You deserve the time to rest.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I also kind of remind people that there was a time where we didn't have access to our cell phones and somehow we all survived. So for me, like if I get a call at 3 a.m., my mom's up in Montreal. So if there's an emergency that happens in Montreal at 3 a.m., I'm not getting there till, even if I left right away, I won't get there till 9. And with my kids, they're the other two that have, and my girlfriend, there's like 4 people that can have an emergency breakthrough. But otherwise, as of like 10 p.m., most of my contacts are all blocked out of my like my phone, because I just don't want to be able to answer it.
Right. And it's not necessary. Right. Yeah. I
And
think that's good self-care.
And I think that that's where, I'm going to put some, maybe if you have some recommendations for the Lux meters, I would love that. And also kind of like remind people to how to, plan their phones so that it doesn't wake them up. Because I think that to me, that's my biggest pet peeve. Anytime someone says, well, I need my phone for this, I'm like, go pay $10 for the old 1980s 1010 flashing thing. And then you put on it, you can go beep, 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 and it's going to wake you up and you're fine. And I've had the same one probably since I was in my early 20s. And I'm like, yeah, see, something like that. Simple, $10 and you're good.
Totally. Yeah, so we're pointing out an old-fashioned, battery-powered little alarm clock. And the one thing I also love about this, Steve, is that it does nothing other than tell the time and wake someone up. I'm not going to glance at this or
Right.
remember it's at my bedside and think about, oh, the radio program I listened to last time, um, or the story, that I fell asleep to, or anything. It has no associations other than what the time is and whether I should wake up or not.
I have a book next to my bed and it's a physical book. What I don't want to plug
Kindle
Amazon
or
Kindle,
mhm,
but or Nook or whatever. I'm not pushing from one
e-reader.
idea. Yeah. E-reader, that's an even better one. But yeah, it really does like paper. And honestly, I do it for me, part of my routine for bed is I get out of my, and again, very manly, I take a bath. But I love taking, and then I go in and write in my journal, grab my book, usually 1 or 2 pages in, even though might be the best book in the world, I go and then I'm like, oh, all right, time for bed. And so
Right.
just creating that routine is key. But one of the things that I also deal with in my practice is I work with a lot of first responders, and the routine sleep is not something that happens a whole lot. And so because I work with a lot of first responders, I wonder if you have any advice for maybe first responders, because their sleep patterns is absolutely garbage.
Yeah, I'm really concerned about first responders' sleep, so I'm very glad that you bring this up. First responders are one of, if not the most sleep deprived occupational group. They generally get around 6 hours of sleep, like 6.1 hours, I think is the most recent I saw. And that's not sufficient. That is just not sufficient. And combine this chronic sleep deprivation with the performance demands and safety risks of their work, it greatly increases their risk of mental health problems. And one of the things that we know is that when a person is sleep deprived or they have a sleep disorder, if they have a trauma when they're in that sleep deprived state, it's more likely that they'll develop PTSD afterwards. And
Mm.
so that's something I'm really concerned about with both first responders and actually military. Military is also a highly sleep deprived occupational group. We are setting them up for developing PTSD by having that sleep culture. And so it's definitely concerning to me. And I know that's a more philosophical question and you were asking for tips. I think the first thing to do is to really make sure that you are not sleep deprived. And that means prioritizing your sleep, which is tricky when you're working nights or you're working long shifts. If you're working a 12-hour shift, giving yourself 8 hours of sleep by the time you commute and shower and eat a bite, that's taken all your time off, which is tricky.
Yeah, I mean, I'm never going to compare myself to first responders, but having worked with them in the community, worked in an ER for several years as a mental health crisis clinician. Even if I finish at 11 o'clock at night, even if I'm a half hour away from my work, I'm not sleeping by midnight. I'm up for another now 90 minutes to an hour, 2 hours, just still
Right.
because you're still like I don't know on so to speak in
Yeah,
my mind.
keyed up and having all the emotions and just needing some wind down time. Yeah, people aren't able to wind down immediately. It takes some time, but I think also, as best you can. And sometimes I think it's helpful actually to make a list because you're not in a very, it can be hard to regulate yourself when you come off of those long shifts. And working in sleep labs, I've had my share of long shifts, but to have a list of when I get home to prepare for bed, I immediately put on my blue blockers. I change into my comfy stuff. I shower. You mentioned taking a bath, and actually having a bath or a shower an hour or two before bed can help sleep. So that's a great practice. And just, kind of both psychologically or spiritually and physically wash off the day, right?
Yeah.
Is a good, it can be more than just the physical wash, but just that practice of separation. I'm ditching my uniform. I'm washing off the day. I'm putting on my blue blockers and having something, a rule of if I'm going to watch TV, it's going to be something mellow and nice, kids programs or, a fun sitcom, but not something intense.
Well, one of the other options that I give people for especially my first responders, I say watch a show that you've watched 100 times.
Oh, great.
Whatever you like. I mean, I'm going to say Seinfeld here, for example, but if you're a big fan of Seinfeld, but you've seen every episode, watch it because it's not going to test your psyche and your ability to make sense of it. You already seen it, so it's just going to calm you down. I watch a lot more reruns than I care to share here. And people always laugh at me, and I'm like, you know what, though? Just calms my brain to get it to where I needs to be.
I like that idea, especially because sometimes people are reaching for alcohol, right? When when we know we need to get to bed, but we don't feel necessarily relaxed or sleepy enough, we might be reaching for alcohol as a sleep aid. And the thing with alcohol is that it does affect our physiology and help us fall asleep initially. But once the alcohol is metabolized off, it wakes us up.
Right.
And so you're having maybe a short-term gain and a longer term problem because then you're awake and your sleep drive has been partially discharged, so you're not able to return to sleep easily, and that can lead to, alcohol problems if you're then getting a drink in the middle of the night, which some people do.
And that's keeps on you keep on reinforcing my whole view of NyQuil or any of those type of medicines to sleep because it is based on alcohol. For the record, for most of them are alcohol based. So
Yeah.
well, we've already come getting close to the hour. It went really fast. I can talk about sleep forever because I certainly struggle with sleep. But I think that it might be helpful for people to know how to reach you and how maybe like there's a couple of things I want to mention. I know that it's Sleep Awareness Week coming up in a few weeks.
Yes, yes, the beginning of March, right around the jump to daylight saving time.
Oh, okay, perfect. And that's definitely where people have more issues with sleep. And it's also where we have most physiological issues because that's when the heart attacks are more common than any other time of the year. Uh, when
Absolutely.
when we fall back or spring forward. So number one. So when is that?
That is March 6th through 11th or something.
All right, great.
Yeah, yeah,
I just want to bring that up to everyone so that they can, think about it. And maybe that'll be some things they can look up there. But, I'm sure that you'll be talking about it. So how can people reach you and maybe like get to know you better or find stuff that you do?
Yeah, totally. So I'm on Instagram and TikTok if you like those formats with just short little pieces of information to help you sleep. And then I do longer form on YouTube and Substack. I'm always a skilled sleeper. And then I have some courses, and the courses are 3.5 hours that people do online with video lessons and then the worksheets to guide you into rebuilding your sleep and making your custom sleep plan. And I took the time, Steve, to really customize those courses to different populations. Like I have one that is specifically for law enforcement because I feel
Perfect.
so concerned about that population. There's one for women, one for families, shift workers, corporate leaders. So that allowed me to really customize, okay, what issues are families having with their sleep? What issues are women having across the lifespan with their sleep? Because it's a little, what women need to learn about sleep is different from what law enforcement necessarily needs to learn. And yeah, so that's at skilledsleeper.com.
Perfect. And as a feminist myself, I'm a big fan of realizing that women have a lot more pressure on them than they used to. I know men are starting to be a little more involved in the household and all that, but women have had this be cheery at work. The whole Barbie movie thing: be good at work, be good at home, look great, but don't bother us. And the pressures on women are very high. So, as a long standing feminist, thank you for doing that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Well, I'm hoping that people go to Skill Sleepers, SKILLSLEEPER, and I'll put those in the show notes. But just want to mention that YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, as well as your website that I'm going to also link in my show notes. And, think about Sleep Week. I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of stuff that Catherine does. But Catherine, I could talk about sleep forever, but I also don't want to put our audience to sleep. Ha, ha, ha. Thank you for your time. I truly appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Sleep well.
Thank you. Well, that completes episode 141. Catherine, Darley, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to reading more and going to your social media. But on episode 142, we're going to meet with Laura Long. Can't wait to talk to Laura Long, and that will be for episode 142. And I hope to see you then.
Please like, subscribe, and follow this podcast on your favorite platform. A glowing review is always helpful. And as a reminder, this podcast is for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only. If you're struggling with a mental health or substance abuse issue, please reach out to a professional counselor for consultation. If you are in a mental health crisis, call 988 for assistance. This number is available in the United States and Canada.